Welcome to Fourth and Frames. I'm your host, Chris Battistow, with my co-hosts, Rhett Manuel and Drew Scott. Tonight, we will be breaking down the 2023 fantasy year with some of our triumphs and tragedies, our crystal ball calls heading into the 2024 fantasy season, and we hand out some of our very own hardware. Let's get it popping. Drew, Rhett, the wild card round is in the books. We've had upsets. We've had blowouts. Rhett, starting with you, what was your favorite storyline from this past weekend of games, man?
I mean, it had to be the Detroit Lions winning that playoff game, right? I mean, I'm sorry, Drew. I know I'm stabbing you through the heart right now. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I started doing it. But I mean, just so happy for Dan Campbell. I remember a few years back, he has that opening press conference, and everybody's like, this guy, he seems like an idiot. Well, come to find out, Dan Campbell is super not an idiot. They built it the right way. Brad Holmes has nailed that draft. At Drew's expense, which I'm so sorry about because I'm a big Puka Nacua fan, big Kyron Williams fan, big Matt Stafford fan. A lot of guys in the Rams I like, but it was just good to see a franchise like the Lions who hasn't done it pretty much ever have some success last week.
Drew, I can tell you what my least favorite part of the weekend was for sure. I have no thoughts because football is dead to me. My heart has moved on to baseball. It's Cardinals baseball time. My mind is still kind of here because we still have shows to do, and there's still football on that I want to watch. But I mean, after you hear the rest of our show today, you might question how much of my mind was in it to begin with. But that's for us to talk about a little bit later. But I mean, I guess my favorite part would probably be just seeing CJ Stroud ball out in his first start and seeing him continue to succeed, man. I've loved watching him play ball. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the league already. So just seeing him ball out was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of the weekend too. The Houston Texans just dismantling the Cleveland Browns. A lot of the pundits picking the Cleveland Browns to win that game with Joe Flacco under center, and seeing Houston just go in there and bully them both offensively and defensively. It was great to watch. How about them Bills picking up the win against Pittsburgh? Pretty solid win. Drew, what do you think about Josh Allen and the fake slide stuff?
I don't know how much of it is fake slides and somebody that just doesn't have a ton of side-to-side agility that's just trying to do the best he can do. I don't know, man. I mean, there's only so much you can do to stop him. I think it's I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, agreed. Hello, Albert. Thanks for joining into the show. All right, before we hop into our year in review of the 2023 fantasy season, we're going to go around the frames here, pick our winners for each game of the divisional round, starting with you, Rhett. Green Bay, San Francisco, who do you got?
Oh, I guess I got to go San Francisco, but that Green Bay team is playing so well right now. Wouldn't shock me to see a Green Bay upset in that situation.
I'm taking San Francisco too, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, the other show, man, you were so hesitant to take San Francisco there, Drew. No confidence in Green Bay, or just overly confident in what the 49ers can do?
Yeah, more so just confident in what the 49ers can do. I don't like picking them to win anything, but I think they take care of business.
All right, moving on to the marquee matchup, the other NFC showdown, Rhett, the Tampa Bay Bucks versus the Detroit Lions. Who do you got, man?
God, Baker's been so much fun, but this is an NFC South rival. I can't pick the Bucks in this situation. Give me the Lions in the NFC Championship game.
Yep. I got the Lions too.
So we're looking at Lions, 49ers right now, heading over to the AFC. We got the Baltimore Ravens versus what we just talked about, the Houston Texans. Does CJ Stroud get it done and keep going, or does the Baltimore Ravens move forward to the AFC Championship, Rhett?
Oh, God. This is probably going to be the game of the weekend in my mind. You got two really good teams that are just Houston's playing so well right now. I'm wondering what that week layoff is going to look like for Baltimore. But you know what? In this one, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to pick with my heart. We've been a pro Nico Collins podcast all season. So give me the Texans in the upset. Let's go.
Yes.
Drew? I can't go that far. I'd love to because as you know, we are a Nico show and we love Stroud too. But I got to ride with Baltimore, man. Lamar was my preseason pick for MVP, so I think he might win it, but I don't want him to fall short in the first round of the playoffs after an MVP season. So I need to see him at least get one under his belt.
Yeah, essentially a 2-week stoppage in play for a lot of the Baltimore starters because they did rest in that last week there. So there's going to be some of that rust based on what Houston Texans got just playing last week. And finally, the other AFC matchup, another marquee game, spoiled as football fans, the Buffalo Bills versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Should be another cold game. Rhett, who do you got taking this one?
Oh, see, Buffalo is playing so well right now. They came out last week, had a great game. Kansas City all of a sudden came out in that playoff game and looked like Kansas City again. Hard one to pick, but I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to pick Buffalo, but that's another where I wouldn't be surprised if somehow Mahomes does Mahomes things and they pull out the upset and advance to the AFC title game.
Give me Kansas City, man. It's tough, but it's so hard for me to bet on Mahomes and Andy Reid in the playoffs. And I know it's not the same team that they've had over the years, but it's hard not to trust those guys after watching them do it over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's gonna be the game I'm looking forward to the most out of all the games this weekend. As good as Detroit, Tampa Bay might be, as good as Baltimore, Houston might be, the Kansas City Buffalo game is the marquee matchup based on the history of these two teams over the last 5 years as well, and the matchups that they've had. So that's going to be a plus game that all three of us, pretty much the whole football community is looking forward to. All right, fellas, we dived into the divisional round. We picked our winners. Let's get into the 2023 year in review. Before we do, let's hop into this fantasy data ad read. Right now, if you go to fantasydata.com and you use the promo code Fantasy in Frames, all one word, that's Fantasy in Frames, you'll get 20% off your monthly subscription to some of the most useful fantasy football data and metrics out there to help you become a better content creator and or fantasy football player. That's fantasydata.com to get 20% off your monthly subscription using promo code Fantasy in Frames, all one word. Boys, let's get into our triumphs and tragedies of 2023. The year in review, we're going to break down some of our hits and misses. Accountability is a big part of what we do here as fantasy football content creators and contributors to the space. And we wanted to talk about some of the players and some of the situations that we were high on that hit, and we want to talk about some of those situations as well that we were high on and we whiffed on. So, Rhett, do you want to start us off with one of your hits, big guy?
Oh, I'm going to start us off with my hit of the season, ladies and gentlemen. And look, I was talking about it probably April, May of last year. I was saying, look, guys, Nico Collins, fresh quarterback. I was like, he's getting drafted pretty low. Don't be shocked if he gives us a 700-yard season and he outperforms ADP. Oh, baby, did we get so much more than that. We ended up with 80 receptions on 109 targets for a 73.4% catch rate, 1,297 yards, and 8 touchdowns. It gets better. 16.2 yards per catch, 11.9 yards per target, 3.24 yards per route run, and that was 9th, 3rd, and 2nd in the league, respectively. And he did all this, only being 56th in routes run and 68th in routes participation across the league. So you know what this tells me going forward? People are worried about what happens when Tank Dell comes back next year. I'm not worried about it because he was so hyper efficient that it feels sustainable. Ends up as the wide receiver 9.5 point PPR, according to our sponsor Fantasy Data. So like I said, I thought 700 yards and 5 touchdowns was going to be a good season for him, that he'd be outperforming and returning value. He did much more than that. He did so much more than that outside in a 10th round ADP. So big hit for me, probably a big hit for all of us. We were also happy to see Nico Collins shine this year. But yeah, I was banging that drum way back when, and I'm happy to bang that drum and say, hey, for once I was right, guys.
Yeah, we Mike Tolberted the shit out of that drum on this show for Nico Collins. So Drew, Rhett's hit, Nico Collins, give us one of yours, man.
Yeah, so my first one's not more of a season long thing. It's my favorite in-season call that I made on our show. And Chris, I think you were actually gone for this episode. It was me, Rhett, and Nate.
So it doesn't count.
It was the week. I got video proof, so it does count. It's the week 3 bussin' discussing in mid show. We had a question from one of the people live in the chat on YouTube that said, "Is there anybody like it said crystal ball? Is there anybody that you would pick up before week 3 to get ahead of the waiver rush for week 4?" And I thought about it for a second, and then I had my answer, and I answered one that I like. I think it might not be a bad idea to stash Devon Achane.
Yeah,
because Salvin Ahmed isn't practicing. Achane just made his first start last week. He's a rookie. He's going to come along a little bit slower, and he's been dealing with injuries of his own. And I don't ever think he'll be a workhorse for the Dolphins, but I mean, it's the guys in front of him. Like Jeff Wilson's going to be coming off IR at some point. Who knows when that is? Raheem Mostert, we know his history. So I think Devon Achane wasn't a guy I really liked a lot during the draft process. But he landed in the perfect spot, the speed of the Dolphins, the speed that he can bring. I don't think there was a team that could have fit him better. And so if there's a guy that maybe we don't see having maybe somebody we didn't expect to have a big role in week 3 that ends up doing so, if there's no Ahmed and it's just Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane there in the backfield, maybe he makes a couple plays and earns himself a bigger role. And then you fast forward to week 3 and Devon Achane goes off for 203 rushing yards, 30 receiving yards, 4 total touchdowns. So that one felt good to get ahead of. So that was my favorite moment from the entire season.
Yeah, what a call to it was for Devon Achane busting out there and just fulfilling your what's the word I'm looking here? Prophetic vision, if prophetic even is a word, on Devon Achane. Love to see it. My one hit, I didn't have many this year, but my one hit was being bullish on wide receiver Jayden Reed before the industry caught up. In February, his ADP was wide receiver 15, which put him as a mid-4th round pick. March ADP, wide receiver 13. You could see the slow climb coming. He was still a top-end 4th round pick. April, wide receiver 11 is when he started to enter that 3rd round. And then finally, the consensus wide receiver 9 in May, which put him in that back end 2nd rounder in terms of rookie drafts. I was taking him ahead of Jonathan Mingo, Marvin Mims, Rashee Rice. For me, I was fighting between Jayden Reed and Josh Downs. Ultimately, Jayden Reed ended up being my wide receiver 5 in the class behind, of course, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers. I wasn't comfortable enough to take Jayden Reed in front of any of those guys, but I was comfortable enough to take Jayden Reed ahead of any of the guys that were behind him. He finished as the wide receiver 3 in the class in fantasy points per game, behind the unicorn that was Puka Nacua and Tank Dell. Finished as the wide receiver 3 in total points amongst rookies, behind Puka Nacua and Jordan Addison. Back end wide receiver 2 finish in his rookie year, and on the most important week of the season, fantasy championship week, he finished as the wide receiver 4, helping managers get to the promised land. I know, Rhett, you drafted Jayden Reed in one of your drafts, and you were pretty happy about that. But Jayden Reed was a big hit of mine this season.
Dude, that actually ended up being a 4th round pick after the 2nd round draft capital, because my league was just behind on that. So, that's one of those salary cap leagues. So I've got him locked up the next couple years for under $1.5 million per season, which in that format's terms would be like $1 on auction, getting him for $1 on auction for multiple years. So we'll take that.
Yeah, we will. And we'll take it to the bank. And he had limited usage too. So when he was on the field, he was getting used. High touchdown number as well. I believe he finished the year with 6 receiving touchdowns. So as Green Bay progresses as an offensive unit, Jaden Reed could be a guy for dynasty managers that's going to excel in that Green Bay offense. So as nice as the hits are, we got some misses. And Rhett, share one of your many misses with us here tonight.
God, I hate it here. But man, I'm just going to go ahead and say this, and I'm also going to throw Drew under the bus right here on this one, because we were both very bullish, extremely bullish, unbearably bullish on Cam Akers coming into the season. And boy, oh boy, did that end up being one of the mistakes of our lives. It was a 7th round ADP, and he responded. He thrived. He made it happen with a career low 2.8 yards per carry this season, guys. We were so excited coming off of the end of that 2022. Oh, league winner. He did it in the playoffs. He got it done. So much hype, and then Kyren Williams happens. And you're like, okay, he's traded. Things are looking up now. Alexander Madison is not that guy.
They were, man. It was going to happen.
And then,
still
pre-Achilles injury, he never eclipsed the 50% snap share. Whether
he was on his way, though, man. He was on his way.
We're still hoping for it. So he never eclipses 50% across any of those teams. He tears that Achilles again. He has a mixture of bad luck and bad opportunity all through the season. I was fooled. I bought in the back of my mind. I probably knew better, but I'm like, oh, opportunity matters. And Kyren Williams, he's not a superb athlete. Well, Kyren Williams is just freaking good at football. So at the end of the day, coming into the season, I had Cam Akers ending the season as a borderline running back 1. I'm going to eat crow here, guys, because he was super not a running back 1, nor 2, nor 3, nor 4, nor 5. My man ended the season as the RB 66. Ouch. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate myself for it, but that Cam Akers pick was ass, and I'm just going to have to live with that. It's fine.
Yeah. I think Drew owes me a water bet as well that we made earlier in the season of Cam Akers versus Miles Sanders.
I don't know if it's that clear that Miles Sanders won that. Cam Akers still might have somehow squirked that out.
I'm going to have to look into that. I'm going to have to look into that. Hey, you might be right, though, because Miles Sanders
squeaked it out. I'll pay up. But I just think it's funny that there's even question of who won it, considering the year Cam Akers had.
And Miles Sanders was dressed the whole year.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Might have been outscored by Cam Akers. It's beautiful but terrible at the same time. So Rhett shared his miss with being bullish on Cam Akers. Drew, share one of your misses with us, and you cannot say being a Rams fan, all right? You cannot say being a Rams fan is your miss on the
year. Oh man! So if you're new to the show, this preseason we did a must, bust, and maybe pick for each team in each division whenever we did the division previews this offseason. And so, each of us would have a must, a bust, or a miss from each team. And so I picked out a couple of my worst calls for a must draft player. So I was telling you, for this team in the divisional preview, you got to draft these guys.
Ooh.
And this is how the must draft. This is how a couple of the must drafts played out. Antonio Gibson for Washington was my must draft player for the Washington Commanders. I had him up at running back 26 compared to his running back 31 ADP, but he finished down at the running back 47. So didn't quite play out the way I thought it would. I thought Antonio Gibson was the clear better talent. I saw a lot of games playing from behind in their future and thought that would play well to Gibson. It turns out it doesn't matter if your coaching staff just only wants to play Brian Robinson. So The other one was, I was gonna brag earlier about calling Deshaun Watson a bust in the Cleveland Browns portion of our divisional previews, but then I remembered that I spent the entire offseason saying instead of drafting that guy, you should wait a couple rounds and draft Geno Smith, who was my must
That you
draft for the
did.
Seattle Seahawks. And I had him at the quarterback 9 compared to his quarterback 15 ADP, but he finished down at quarterback 25. So not even and this is on in fantasy points per game, but so not even a quarterback 2 in fantasy points per game. And I was preaching the good word of wait and draft Geno. So yeah, those must drafts did not feel good looking back on them.
Yeah, but the process is always there with these. It's not like we're just throwing crap at the wall and seeing what sticks there. There's a reason why we're picking Geno Smith and Cam Akers to be these must draft guys. Most of these calls are preseason. These must bust and maybe calls we made, I believe, end of July heading into August when we were breaking down all the divisions. And one of my misses this year was when we broke down the AFC East with Joe Pisapia, and my bust was from the Miami Dolphins. And you brought him up earlier there, Drew. That was Devon Achane. After the first 2 weeks, I thought, my labeling as a bust for this guy was going to be a hit because he wasn't even dressed week 1. They didn't even have him on the field week 1. And then the guy goes out and puts up 800 yards, 8 TDs on the season. Between weeks 3 and 5, he goes on an absolute tear. Like you mentioned, Drew, 200 plus yards, 4 TDs in that game against Denver. And for me, what it was an adjustment in my process, getting away from overvaluing the league normal, or what we thought was the league normal, of these prototypical 215, 5'11", 6-foot running backs that usually find success in the NFL. And we're kind of seeing that pivot, even with the wide receivers, with the smaller wide receivers making a name in the NFL. And then we're seeing that with, as well as the running backs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyron Williams, Devon Achane this past season. So Devon Achane for me was a miss, and I was fading him in the back end of the first round of rookie drafts, and I shouldn't have been doing that. So for me, the rookie running back sensation Devon Achane was a big miss for me this year.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's several players this year that kind of made us all have to decide if we needed to change our processes or not, because it was guys like Zay Flower as well with Devon Achane and Tank Dell, guys that whenever you just look at the thresholds of what you want from a receiver, they need to be, this height, this much weight, this BMI, 40, just all these different things that there's been some players there's been more outliers than usual here lately that we've had to really pay attention to. So I think it's something that we all gotta kind of see what we can do to fix our processes to try to make them less like outliers, but it's tough.
Yeah, speaking of that AFC South preview right now, I'm looking back at that show sheet, and first off, I've got to say that some of my picks on just back then so bad. I had Nico Collins as a maybe, so we can call that a hit. I had Tank Bigsby as a maybe for the Jags. Ooh. So Tajay Spears is a bust in there. Once again, not great. And then Michael Pittman as a must. So we actually hit it there. So that works. Yeah. So processes, they matter.
Yeah. And it matters too to recognize, where your process has flaws and to build on that and, correct those things that lead to, that lead to these misses that we have here, like Devon Achane. I mean, the Cam Akers one it's hard to say that the guy's going to blow out his other Achilles, was going to get traded to Minnesota and not pan out. So like that call there, it's a tough miss. I should have seen Devon Achane. I mean, the writing was on the wall with the draft capital and the system that he was in. Who else was in the backfield? I should have seen that one coming, but it is what it is, man.
We move
on to Cincinnati, baby. Are we bringing the guest in here? Are we popping in Nate? I see Nate here in the studio.
Absolutely. If he'll join us,
Nate?
what's up, Nate?
Hey, I just wanted to be behind the scenes and listen to my boys. I ain't talked to you guys in a long time. You don't have to have me on here. I'm just came to shoot the shit. Please continue on. If
we saw you with the chain, so we had to bring you on so you can show us the chain. Look at that.
Ooh, got my bling, my trophy smack bling. It's but you mind if I take it off, because it's really heavy.
It looks heavy. That's got to be real gold, right?
When I say it's every bit of 6 pounds, it's legitimate 6 pounds.
That thing's a beaut, Clark.
That is a beauty.
If you see a hump in my neck, it's because I wore it for 7 hours on that Sunday, and it was a long day. But
doing the Mike Tyson workout, eh? I like it.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't wear the belt as well because I'd had to carry it. Unfortunately, it was too much. They would have let me in though. It was SoFi allowed. That's for sure.
Very nice.
I like that. Well, Nate, we're happy to have you on the show, man. We're just talking about the 2023 fantasy season, talking about some of our hits and misses. We're going to be handing out some fantasy awards in a little bit and going through some 2024 bold calls, man. So you're more than welcome to stick around with us if you want.
Here, not being prepared, I mean, I'm always happy to insert my 2 cents on some things. I'm just as happy to sit back and relax and listen and gain some knowledge. Because remember, I listen to what you guys say. I'm a player when it comes next year too. I want to know how I got to beat Drew in King's Class. Well, not King's, but a Scott Fish Bowl, because we'll have a live draft. He's gonna run it back.
You had no problem with that this year.
Well,
just let Drew draft Antonio Gibson this year, and you'll be fine.
I'll do it, Drew. Antonio Gibson's a free agent, man. You let him land in a spot where there's even a sliver of opportunity there, and I'm all in all over again next year.
We're gonna be here same time next year, and Drew's gonna be saying, "One of my misses is Antonio Gibson." But if you want some quality advice, Rhett's gonna drop one of his hits from this past season. Go ahead, Rhett.
Actually, Chris, what I'm going to drop right now is a second miss from this season. Because if there is anything I love in life, is being accountable and looking foolish at the same time. So let's get it and let's have fun. So what are my misses, and what perfect timing being that Nate Markham is in the room? I had Patrick Mahomes as my quarterback 1 overall to end the season. And so let's say this. While Patrick Mahomes was a quarterback 1 for the season, he ended as the QB 8. He was not the quarterback 1 for the season, which is what I projected. He did it out of an early 3rd round draft slot. ADP was like that first pick of the 3rd round. He just had one of those years where he was more inconsistent than normal. Set a career high in interceptions. By Patrick Mahomes standards, only had 7 QB1 weeks this season, which by Mahomes standards, once again, down season, career high in interceptions. Something just was a little bit off in the middle of the season. Not sure what it was. This might have just been one of those funky years where football happens. Still think he's the best and most talented quarterback in football. But as for this year, when I had him as my quarterback 1 overall, it just didn't happen. And that's okay, because you know why? Because my man is still playing in the postseason right now in fantasy football. Frankly, at this point, dear, he doesn't give a damn. So Patrick Mahomes wasn't my quarterback 1, but you know what? He'll be just fine. Those direct deposits are still coming through. He's still playing football in January. All is well.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, is it fair to say that all the pressure this weekend is on the Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean,
even
how many
though
days
the Chiefs are, defending champs.
Yeah, but the Bills are the 2 seed, right? They're the home team, and they're the ones that have lost these games in the past. How many Chiefs losses in a row can you stack up in the playoffs before people just start cleaning house and starting over? And not that I'm saying that on record say that's what the Bills need to do, but I'm just saying, like, eventually you keep losing the same game over and over. you would think players and coaches on a team that make it that deep into the playoffs over and over are safe, but at some point there's some pressure that has to build up, I would think.
And the one thing they haven't experienced yet is they haven't faced the Chiefs when they've actually had a defense that has led the way. You know, they've mostly been tit for tat from offensive standpoint. Now they have to do something where the Chiefs were close to having a historic season, almost like all-time defensive points against, etc. It's not like they just were, and I go back to Drew, like the Rams of old, like the 299 Rams, where their defense was good, but they're good because they were on the heels of 40 points a game, and all they could do is sit back,
Right.
pin their ears back, rush the quarterback, and force turnovers. The Chiefs are doing it with, pressure up front. And I said that going into the game, I thought that was the biggest thing with Tua, is that if Tua's clean, second best completion percentage in the NFL. Tua's pressured, second worst. And the Chiefs were second in pressures all on the season, second in sacks. Everything was leading up. Can they get to Josh Allen? Will they take Josh Allen down? That's going to be a whole different ballgame. But I don't know which part of the offense for the Bills will beat the Chiefs. That's the question I have maybe for you three. And I don't know if I have an answer. Is it going to, it won't be Gabe Davis again, will it? It hasn't been.
It will be, of course.
Of course it will be. Of course.
It's going to be anybody.
Khalil Shakir, and then he'll go 6 rounds higher next year because he'll get that bump.
Yep.
It's going to be Andy Isabella.
There we go.
Because he's actually getting targets and snaps in the post for Buffalo.
How are the Chiefs with covering tight ends?
So that's the one. I don't want to say that they're like just middle of the pack, because that's about where they're at. But I also don't think that they've necessarily had too much in the way of competition from the tight end position that's really beaten them. Nobody's really beaten them. They've been the only one spot that they're worse than, let's see, top 10 against was the running back position. And that's just on a per average basis. And we saw that with, Mostert and them, if they could have continued their run game. So maybe James Cook is the answer there, but
James Cook, Dawson Knox, and Kincaid. Yep.
I just don't. I think those tight ends. That's the problem I have, is they cannibalize each other. I don't trust any one of them to have enough from a fantasy standpoint, but from a real football standpoint, you're going to have to play physical. You see what they did to Tyreek? I mean,
L'Jarius Sneed has been so good at taking the number one receiver out of the game whenever you play against Kansas City, and Buffalo's been doing a good enough job taking Diggs out of the offense on their own. They don't really need any help with that, but now you get some help with it, having you got a tough cover corner shutting down Diggs. I mean, your options get limited after that. And so you're basically saying, is it really going to be Gabe Davis again, or is it going to be James Cook and the tight ends, whoever Josh Allen decides to throw to for that day? But I find it hard to believe that it's going to be Diggs, but I guess we'll see.
We definitely will see. For me, it's going to come down to Josh Allen, whether or not he can steal the game for the Bills. That's what it's going to come down to. When he rushes, if he does attempt that fake slide, I mean, the Chiefs just gotta finish the check. And to steal a term from hockey, they gotta finish the check. The moment that they finish that hit, whether they get the personal foul or not, if he slides or fake slides, he ain't going to do it again, right? So they just got to play physical ball with Josh Allen, and the Chiefs can do it. They have the offense to keep up. They have the defense to shut down the Bills, and I'm looking forward to that matchup. So we had Rhett's hit. We had his 2 misses. Drew, do you have another one for us?
Another miss?
Yeah, you got a few on the year, don't you?
Yeah, I got them blocked and loaded, man. Don't you worry.
You can hit, a miss, a maybe, to anything you got for us.
Let's pile on some more misses. Why not, man? So I talked about my must draft players during our preseason preview that were misses. Well, I also called a few guys some bust players for their team that were not bust. And so let's just go through those as the next miss. And these are even more painful than my must drafts that were misses. Number 1, I had TJ Hawkinson as a bust player during our Minnesota Vikings team preview. look, he was the tight end. He was the tight end 3 overall. I had him as a tight end 4, so I wasn't like way behind necessarily, but I didn't like where he was being drafted in terms of like I think he needed to drop a round or 2 for me to be comfortable drafting him. And turns out he finished the year as the tight end 3, right where he was being ranked by consensus. So you were happy where you drafted him. You did not need to wait a round or 2 to draft TJ Hawkinson. And so that one was a miss on my part. And then by far, this is my most painful call of the entire year. It's the one that I regret the most. I hate myself for it because I love the player. But whenever we were talking about the NFC South and we were talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I called Mike Evans the bust for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I hate myself for that because I had him as the wide receiver 37 compared to his wide receiver 32 ADP, and he finished as the wide receiver 7 overall, 30 spots higher than where I had him slotted. It was my worst call of the year. And I think I even mentioned, whether it was that show or a show later on in the offseason, that I was worried that Baker might be this year's Geno because, the quarterback coach for Seattle, Geno's resurgence year, was the same guy as the offensive coordinator for Tampa, and he has the weapons around him. And I should have just listened to myself, man. Why am I calling a future Hall of Famer a bust? Whenever he was being drafted outside of the top 30 receivers, like that was such a stupid decision on my part. Like if somebody that's a future Hall of Famer that's still good enough to get the job done, if they're being drafted in the 30s at their position, you probably shouldn't call them a bust. So that was a lesson learned the hard way on my part. And it's just a continued lesson of like these receivers that we're lower on just because they get what we see in our mind as a quarterback downgrade, like going from Russell Wilson to Geno Smith or going from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield. These guys that are just really damn good receivers, they find a way to get it done, and we just need to trust that. I'm talking to myself in the mirror when I say that. So that's definitely been a lesson learned for me this year.
Yeah, that's a good lesson to learn there. Like you said, with all that stuff with Mike Evans, trust the talent, and Baker Mayfield wasn't going to be afraid to just YOLO the ball downfield. We knew ultimately that Mike Evans was good for at least a handful of wide receiver 1 finishes just based on the system there at Tampa Bay and the fact that Baker was pretty much just playing to continue to be a NFL quarterback. So he was going to put his wide receivers into some good positions. But you weren't the only one that was down on Mike Evans. I would say, like you said, the consensus was pretty down on him as well there. So don't beat yourself up too much, Drew. Like, I'm going to beat myself up.
You should have been a screaming value, man.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I'm going to beat myself up quite a bit this offseason just based on how much I own of this player. And a miss of mine this year was being so high on Deshaun Watson returning to form with the Cleveland Browns. I was high. Drew knows, you guys know, you all know, I was too high. I never meant to give you mushrooms, girl. Now you're sitting in the corner crying high on Deshaun Watson this coming year. I mean, he did have 3 of his 6 games where he finished as a QB1. Watching him play through a full season would have been interesting. The rushing upside was there, but the inconsistencies and where I was drafting him ultimately is what cost me. Highest total consecutive games played was 3, and then he would miss a game, come back for 2, miss a game. We had the phantom injury that we didn't quite know what was going on. Then he had the season-ending surgery there. So 6 total games played. He left due to injury. And then Joe Flacco came in and made it look like Deshaun Watson was the entire problem with the Cleveland Browns offense there. So lots of questions for me with my Deshaun Watson shares heading into the 2024 season. But being overly high on a quarterback that's missed so much time really bit me in my rear this year.
You weren't the only one, though, to be fair, because we had a whole debate segment where I was like, Deshaun Watson, and I think it might have actually been my fault, where you were like, well, I kind of like Deshaun Watson, and now you're like, well, that was a pretty good argument. So now I think I'm really in on Deshaun Watson. So I'm going to take some of this blame. It's on me, bud. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring you to my world.
And Nate watched me draft Deshaun Watson at the live draft for Scott Fishbowl as my QB1 in a super flex league at the right at the 301 right there at the third round reversal. I took Deshaun Watson and wasn't the only reason that my Scott Fishbowl team struggled by any means, but he was one of them. And just lesson learned: don't draft a player that you pick as a bust whenever you do the division preview, because that I have nobody to blame but myself at that point. And so, but I was deciding between him and Geno Smith, to be fair, and I already talked about how that played out with Geno. So I'm the problem. It's me.
Those are our triumphs and tragedies of the 2023 season. Before we pivot to the handing out of hardware for some of our favorite players of this past season, Rhett, Drew, Nate, any other hit and misses that you guys might want to share?
I listening to one that I don't know where you three were. My biggest probably miss was how high I was on Devontae Adams. He was I think I at one point said I would just as rather have him as CeeDee Lamb. Now, maybe what I should have said is, in a perfect world, they could be similar in target share and target volume. What he does with that, maybe not quite so much. So that was clearly a miss, and that was one that I was drafting a lot of because nobody else was really buying into the Vegas pass game, which rightfully so. I think Tony Pollard was probably right up there with me as far as, who will I push up ahead of the others and try to be, I don't know about smarter than the room by any means, because everybody was on Pollard as well. The situation was there. But yeah, he was definitely a miss. And I think you guys crushed all your hits for sure. And collectively, when you have a hit, so do I, because I listen to what you guys have to say.
Yeah, there was a couple, I highlighted a lot of the misses that I had from our must bust and maybe from the preseason, but there were a couple highlights too. Like I had Keenan Allen as the must draft from the Chargers. I had him as wide receiver 12 compared to his wide receiver 18 ranking. He ended up finishing wide receiver 3 in points per game, so I felt good about that one. And then my bust pick for the AFC South for the Texans was Dameon Pierce. I had him at running back 24 compared to his running back 15 ADP. He ended up finishing as running back 57. So that one, I felt that being on Keenan Allen and off of Dameon Pierce ended up playing out all right. And then I had Trey McBride as a maybe pick for the Arizona Cardinals as well. And that, he ended up finishing as the tight end 13 in fantasy points per game. And we know what he did down the stretch as well. So, there was some good in there mixed with the bad. The bad just they stick on the front of the mind a little bit more. They're easier to remember. I got to go look up the good, but the bad really just stick with you.
Brett.
Oh, I was looking at this. I have one really, really egregious miss. I'm just going to focus on all my bad tonight. So that way, whenever I actually nail something, people are going to be like, man, he's so smart. No, we talked about all the hits we had. Guys, you know who I had as a must draft out of the NFC South? And we talked about him earlier. I said, you must draft Miles Sanders.
Oh, yeah. That was one of mine too. Don't worry.
So, oof. That's all I'm going to say. Just oof.
Say Deuce. Because Deuce Staley's the one that duped us. Dupe Staley, more like it. Tricked us into thinking he was going to get the volume.
It's very, very true. I've had a ton of misses over the last season, but a hit that I'm kind of proud of, along with Jaden Reed, was making Zay Flowers the must-draft wide receiver out of the Baltimore Ravens. Ultimately finished as the Baltimore Ravens wide receiver 1. And if you did have Zay Flowers and he took you to that promised land, head over to trophysmack.com where you'll feel the rush. Dive into glory with promo code FIF. That's FIF at trophysmack.com. Get your hands on a free fantasy football championship ring when you purchase one of their epic belts or trophies. Indulge in the extraordinary. Surrender to the allure of Trophy Smack. Use code FIF, F-I-F, at trophysmack.com and become a legend, Trophy Smack style. Don't just listen Immerse yourself in the seduction of success. When you visit TrophySmack.com and use promo code FIFF, you get a free championship ring when you purchase a belt or trophy. All right, fellas, that's it for our triumphs and tragedies, our hits and misses for the 2023 season. Let's hand out some fantasy football awards. We're going to give out, Nate, our waiver ad of the year, our offensive rookie of the year, our comeback player of the year, and our fantasy football MVP. Of course, all these awards are going towards fantasy football purposes. So let's not get too crazy and pick Evan Brown, center of the Seattle Seahawks, for your comeback player of the year. All right. Nothing cute, nothing crazy. But by all means, if you want to pick an IDP guy because you are the IDP presence on the show and you are the host of the Shoot the Gap show here at Fantasy Frames, pick an IDP guy, brother. It's all good. We will start with our waiver ad of the year. And Drew, you can lead us off, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's the only person, in my opinion, that even has somewhat of an argument against the guy that I'm going to pick for fantasy MVP. I won't spoil it, even though it should be obvious. But the guy that I would argue, if I had to pick somebody to argue against my fantasy MVP this year, it would be Kyren Williams. And you mean to tell me that you could get somebody you can argue for fantasy MVP off the waivers? You can call me a homer if you want, but this is an easy choice to me, man. You didn't get any fantasy points from week 7 through 11. They had their bye week during that time, and he was out with injuries. But the man was the running back 2 in fantasy points per game, and he was the only running back within 3 fantasy points per game of Christian McCaffrey. And in the fantasy playoffs, he put up games of 22 fantasy points, 16 fantasy points, and 29 fantasy points on championship week to get you the chip. So he might have missed a few weeks in the middle, but he got you off to a hot start once you picked him up off waivers or if you drafted him late. And then he helped you bring home a championship down the stretch as well. So all that off the waiver wire. So to me, that sounds like the waiver wire out of the year to me.
Yep. Solid grab. Kyren Williams was a stud, man, and an absolute waiver ad of the year. Rhett, we got Kyren Williams as the waiver ad of the year. Who's yours, man?
I'm going to go with my personal waiver ad of the year, and that was Jerome Ford for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, Jerome Ford, after Nick Chubb went down, there were all these questions about what's going to happen. Is that running back position going to be okay? And I'm like, guys, trust me, the guy's talented. He's going to figure it out. He ended up being the running back 25 in fantasy points per game and then running back 16 overall. So he ends up as a solid RB2, ends up with 250 touches on the season, 4 yards per carry, nine total touchdowns, had 12 of his 17 games as a running back 2 or better. And he did all of this pretty much in a 50-50 timeshare for the season. So, this is a guy that, had the opportunity gone up had it been a 70-30 situation. There's, based off the efficiency and the usage, there may have been an RB1 season on the horizon based off of what he did. Now, we can't play in what shoulda, coulda, wouldas, but we have what we have, and a guy in a 50% snap share ends up as a solid RB2 and a weekly starter that you can use. That's what it ended up being for me, and that was pretty dang solid. So, for me, wasn't able to get my hands on Kyren, wasn't able to get my hands on Puka. So, we ended up with Jerome Ford being my personal waiver ad of the year, and I was pretty happy with that.
Yep. Another solid ad, another solid running back ad for this past season. For me, my personal waiver ad of the year, under 1% ownership on Yahoo after week 1. One of the very few waiver ads that you carry throughout the whole season that amount to being a league winner. This guy could very well be the fantasy football MVP as well. And it's very rare that you find that kind of guy off waivers. Didn't see a game where he saw under 7 targets. The first 2 weeks, he had 35 targets, 25 receptions, 266 yards, shared the field with one of the best wide receivers in the game, an absolute killer who was vaulted himself into top 10 Dynasty wide receiver status, plug and play throughout the whole season. And my waiver ad of the year was Puka Nacua, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. Nate, You got one for us?
Yeah, since those would be the top 3 for me. I'll tell you one that I hate to even I want to go get some mouthwash. I think Zach Moss could very easily. Now it might not have been
That's
for
a
the
good
whole
one.
season, but if you look at the weeks that you picked him up to start him, and that's the idea of a waiver wire, is to have, plug in and actually go into your lineup. Well, we had finishes of RB4, RB2, RB10, RB11, RB18. I mean, it was from weeks 2 through 10, 2 through 9. He was an RB1. And so, granted, you hope that you had some better pieces towards the playoffs, but I would say that he's up there with the running backs in contention for sure. There was a lot of them. This, substantiates a lot of the zero RB people, because if you were lucky enough to grab, you could have had Jerome Ford, Kyron Williams, and Zach Moss, and you likely would have done very well for those weeks that you started them. Problem is, I've said this 1,000 times. 0 RB, 0 wide receiver, 0 QB, late round QB, 0 whatever. Only works if you pick up the guys that actually hit. Other than that, it's an abundance of garbage. But yeah, I think it hurts me. And I, like I said, want to go brush my teeth. But Zach Moss could definitely be added to that list for sure.
Absolutely, he could.
Yeah, he can. He was, like you said, solid for the weeks that you needed him there, Zach Moss.
Mhm.
So our comeback players of the year, waiver ads of the year. Drew went with Kyron Williams. Rhett went with Jerome Ford. My waiver ad was Puka Nacua, and Nate's was Zach Moss. Now we're going to pivot to comeback player of the year in terms of fantasy football. Rhett, who's your comeback player of the year, man?
Oh, not only is he my comeback player of the year, he is the smelling salt god. Came out fired up this past weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, what a season for Baker Mayfield.
Mm-hmm.
Came into this season, guys, undrafted in fantasy leagues, and ends the season as QB10. Was 7th in total pass attempts, 1st in deep ball attempts, 3rd in air yards, 7th in passing touchdowns for the season. One of the most consistent fantasy quarterbacks across the board all season. Never really gave you those super high spike weeks, but didn't really put you in the mud either throughout the season. So he was a guy that was pretty steady, especially in the super flex. He was a guy you wanted. He had 10 of his 17 weeks where he had 2 touchdown passes or more. Only 2 weeks where he didn't have any touchdown passes. And we talked about this earlier. Mike Evans had this super low ADP to start off the season. It was because of that Baker Mayfield connection. And Mike Evans turned into one of those guys that was on a lot of league-winning rosters this season. So it was a little bit of a double dip there. Baker Mayfield helped out Mike Evans. Mike Evans helping out Baker Mayfield be a little bit better than he was. Dave Canales hopefully parlaying this into a head coaching job, which I fully believe he deserves. We won't talk about that. We don't have time for it. But what a season for Baker Mayfield. All of a sudden, he's America's sweetheart again. Our little bearded, dancing, short king just doing his thing, and we're here for it.
Just waking up feeling dangerous. Great call there, Rhett, for the comeback player of the year. Drew, who's your comeback player of the year, man?
I look, if I hadn't already picked a Rams player for like half these segments, I probably would have picked Matthew Stafford coming back from injury and playing. He was looking awful quarterbacky, for most of the year. And but my pick, the Fox, whoever it was that said quarterback, he probably thought he looked pretty quarterbacky for a good portion of the season as well. It's Joe Flacco from the Cleveland Browns, man. I did not have Mr. Elite himself coming out of retirement to save the Browns season on my bingo card by any means, but he was the quarterback 2 overall in fantasy points per game from weeks 13 to 17. So the best part about the whole process was he didn't cool off until the actual NFL playoffs. So for your fantasy playoffs, you got to ride him the whole way. So from a fantasy standpoint, honestly, I think Rhett probably has the right answer with Baker Mayfield, but just to give you somebody different, somebody that popped up, later in the year, the Joe Flacco story, man, what a story. And he tugged at my heartstrings after his very first game, whenever he talked about like, hey, my kids are at an age where they can really like they can really appreciate what's happening. Like they're really watching me ball out for the first time, and like hearing him talk about that and the passion of that. And it's just like, as a father, I can imagine some of the feelings that he had from that. So that was just a really cool story for me.
Yep, I agree. It was a great story for for the NFL as a whole. Unfortunately, he did turn back into a pumpkin this past weekend against the Texans. But a great story nonetheless for fantasy purposes. The time that we used Joe Flacco, he was terrific. And that is the tone for us to move to Nate. Nate, so who's your comeback player of the year?
This will be one. I will dip into the IDP segment realm, just because I think that I get the feeling you guys are going to touch on the three comeback players that I would highlight without reaching too far. I think he deserves recognition. Is Khalil Mack, linebacker for the Los Angeles Chargers. If you look at the last real 3 seasons, he has an eclipsed last 4 seasons. Forgive me. Double-digit sacks. He's had 8.5, 9, 6, and 8. If you look at the last 2 seasons combined, he still didn't match this year's 17 sacks that he had on the season. He got to his, the bonus he needed. He had every possible, comeback accolade. He's most likely could be the MVP of the IDP segment, but that it would be the only one to this this hardware that I want to jump into the IDP side, because this is not shoot the gap. This is yours. And so I could say realistically that I think that one person who I felt like a little bit of a comeback, just because I was so down on from a touchdown standpoint, Cortland Sutton had a resurgence back into our touchdown graces. I mean, huge production from that. The total volume on there for a team that was in shambles for the most part this season. Maybe he's someone that we can trust in a little bit going forward.
Yep. I love that call. And someone could even say Russell Wilson is comeback player of the year a little bit. I mean, he did get booted at the end of the season there, but there was a stretch there where Russell Wilson
good ball
was
for a little bit.
Decent fantasy quarterback. Hello, Bob Harris. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you stopping by. My comeback player of the year this year was quarterback Kyler Murray. He did miss the first half of the season, projected by some to maybe not even play this year at all. Played 8 games, averaged just over 18 fantasy points per game, which made him a back-end QB1, 5.5 carries per game, averaged over just 19 fantasy points per game in the fantasy playoffs with 2 QB1 finishes, a QB12 and a QB4 finish in that span. 4 QB1 finishes with no finishes worse than a mid QB2. Granted, he came back his first opening week of Call of Duty. Let me know that Kyler Murray finally turned a corner and we may be getting the QB1 that we've come to know out of Kyler Murray as fantasy football players. So, and he had 3 rushing touchdowns in his first 3 games back. So back-to-back rushing touchdowns. He absolutely paid dividends if you were a fantasy manager that either drafted him and stashed him or picked him up a few weeks leading to his return. I mean, hard to say that Joe Flacco's not the ultimate winner in this. Baker Mayfield, all 4 guys deserving of this fantasy award. Hey, Jorge, thanks for tuning in. We got 2 more awards, and then we got our crystal ball calls. We'll rip through the MVP because I think it's pretty much unanimous across the board. Before we get to the fantasy football MVP, we're going to get to our fantasy football rookie of the year. And you know what? We'll start it off with you, Nate.
Man, I don't want to take you guys go ahead, because I'll just see if I can find another one, because I don't want to take any of your thunder. You did all this prep work. I snuck into the studio. I'll let you guys go. I have who I think it is, but I'm sure it's going to it probably be who Drew's going to pick if we know anything about that.
Busted.
All right. You know what? I'll start with this one. My rookie of the year, CJ Stroud. Unprecedented season. The guy just makes it look easy. This is his first year. We were told to scout the helmet that OSU quarterbacks can't play at the next level. We were told that he would be no good because he got a low score on this computer test. We were told that the Houston Texans would continue to still be a poverty franchise. I had him as my QB1 in the class. I just did not expect him to have such a stellar season, 7 finishes as a QB1, top 8 QB in fantasy points per game, QB9 overall in total fantasy points scored, 4,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, the lowest amount of interceptions amongst qualifying QBs, no interceptions in his first 5 games, led the NFL in passing yards per game, led the NFL in touchdown interception ratio, first rookie to lead the NFL in touchdown to interception ratio, took the Houston Texans from worst to division first. So many things that this guy did to elevate his franchise, so many things that this guy did to elevate fantasy managers' franchises who drafted him in one of those first few picks in Superflex leagues. If you drafted CJ Stroud, you were pretty happy with his overall season, considering how much impact he had as a rookie quarterback and how rookie quarterbacks don't necessarily have this kind of fantasy production. He is my overall rookie of the year.
Yep, love it. Perfect.
What you got, Rhett?
Man, I'm going to go along in a similar ilk. My rookie of the year was Sam Laporta, because it is not often that you say a rookie come out and finish as the first overall player at their position. And that was Sam Laporta this season, guys. Really, the narrative in fantasy football all through these years has been you can't play tight ends in their rookie season because they have so much to learn, so much to do. And Sam Laporta has single-handedly helped change that narrative by himself. And it came out of a 10th round ADP. That seems to be a theme for me so far tonight. But he ended the season with 86 catches total. He was top 5 in so many categories among this position: targets, target share, air yards, red zone targets, total TDs, receiving yards, all top 5 in all of those categories. So well earned in terms of being the tight end 1. And he was super consistent all year in, 16 fantasy weeks. My man had 11 tight end 1 weeks over the season. So it's hard. He's a stud. Like, even last week in the playoff game, he's hobbled on a knee and he just gets this crazy separation and catches touchdown. I'm like, you cannot stop this man. Like, he is just tremendous. He's been tremendous all year. He's my dynasty tight end 1 going forward. I mean, there's just so much to like about him. Bright future ahead. Well-earned rookie of the year in my book.
So another solid pick. We got CJ Stroud. We got, who'd you pick there, Rhett? Sam Laporta. Sorry, his name. I was thinking of who Drew picked. I was gonna say who Drew picked. And then Drew, what you got, man? I think it's pretty obvious one.
Yeah, it's obvious that I'm only competing with Chris's pick because Chris couldn't even remember who Red picked, so that's already out of the picture. So, for me, it might be obvious, and you can call me a homer again if you want. But hey, I don't care. It's the right answer. It's Puka Nacua, man. And this is another one that felt so easy to me. Whenever you break the yards and receptions record at your position as a rookie and finishes the wide receiver 9 in points per game as a rookie, while being basically free during the draft process, which why, again, Chris, I understand why he would be your waiver ad of the week, just racking up the hardware at this point. You've got yourself an offensive rookie of the year right there. The man was a top 13 receiver 9 out of the first 17 weeks of the year. Like, over half of the year, you were getting a top 13 wide receiver, plug and play. Forget about it, man. Offensive rookie of the year, waiver ad of the year, Kyron Williams, couple 5th round picks. I don't know how these guys do it over there in LA, but I'm not mad at them.
They got the computers, man. They got those computers.
Mm-hmm.
Just picking their draft picks for them. All right, Nate, what you got, man? Who's your rookie of the year?
So with the 3 that you guys named are probably the 3 that I would say would be at the top in terms of obvious. But if you dig just a little bit deeper and you look at the one thing, and I think we've talked about this for years, is that when you draft a rookie, the expectation is that you're not going to pay immediate dividends unless you just happen to be Puka Nacua and Sam Laporta. But if you go in kind of the 4th foresight is to say, I want someone's going to guide me through the playoffs. They're going to finally get that 14, 15 games under their belt, and they're going to be able to lead you. And that leads to two different players. One could be Jahmyr Gibbs, simply because weeks 14 through 17, if you look at the running back position, over that stretch, he was the RB5. I mean, he's the person that you would have drafted, hoping he was going to carry you the whole season and then really pick it up in the playoffs. The problem is there's a person who probably you could have drafted much later, and that's Rashee Rice, in the same mold of that weeks 14 through 17, where he was the wide receiver 10 over that span. And so we saw Rashee Rice really, I think of all the players that we named, the largest increase from first half to second half is clearly Rashee Rice. And I think that could pay dividends going into next year. So those two I'll say is honorable mentions, if you will. Fantasy playoff maybe winners for teams that might get more, put on your shoulders and carry you to the championship. Hopefully, if you had both those two guys, you had a better chance than most.
Yeah, agreed. And speaking of carrying teams to fantasy championships, when we talked about this segment, we pretty much said the fantasy MVP is one guy across the board, and it's going to be really hard to make a case for anyone else above this guy. You can talk CeeDee Lamb. You might be able to go find a quarterback, Lamar Jackson as the fantasy MVP. But Nate, I don't know about you, but the three of us are all in agreement that Christian McCaffrey is ultimately this year's fantasy MVP, man.
Yeah, he led the in half-point scoring. He was the largest variance from first to second overall in total points per game at any of the skill positions. So I think that's the biggest. You drafted him where you did, hoping that he was going to stay healthy and be that guy and not see Elijah Mitchell eat into workload, which everybody was concerned a little bit, and all the offenses. But I think that's easy too. I mean, you could make a case like you said, CeeDee Lamb, maybe Tyreek Hill as well could be, but it's. I think that's for sure CMC.
You guys got anything to add? You want to give CMC some flowers?
I really didn't put anything in my show notes for my personal self. I left that part blank. Like it's a given. Everybody understands. Like he's one of the few guys you really paid for at the top, and you were certainly not disappointed in what you got from him. Whenever you look at the guys that were drafted around him, it was like Nate mentioned, it was him and Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb. Those were really the couple of guys that stood out at the top of the draft, and CMC was just a cut above everybody else, man. He's the 101. He should have been the 101 this year. He's the 101 next year.
You'd really have to screw up your draft to have him on your team and not make the playoffs. I mean, really would have had to botch your team. It would have had to have been a monumentally bad draft, right, Drew?
Yeah. I wish somebody out there could relate to that. I can't. There's certainly none of my teams with Christian McCaffrey that did poorly at all.
84 points alone against the Arizona Cardinals he scored. Christian McCaffrey did. So that's just
he's something
stud,
else, man.
Clutch gene, consistent RB1 finishes week in and week out. He did save his worst game for week 17, the last game, but he was dealing with a bit of some calf issues there, some injury issues. But you can't hold out 1 week against 16 weeks or 15 weeks of elite production. And if you had Christian McCaffrey on your team and you won your championship, head over to the dynastydex.com. Use promo code FRAMES, FRAMES, to get $5 off a fully customizable championship plaque outlining your championship victory in your fantasy football leagues this past season. For any combination of positions, both the offense or IDP, their customer services representatives will work with you to help capture your fantasy football team's title-winning performance on one of their high-quality plaques. That's thedynastydex.com. Use promo code FRAMES, FRAMES, to get $5 off a fully customizable championship plaque. Fellas, we gone over our hits. We gone over our misses. We handed out some fantasy football awards. Let's go around the frames here quickly before Jorge hops in and completely cuts the feed to the show. and give out some of our crystal ball bold takes that we can revisit this time next year, heading into the 2024 season. Rhett, lead us off, brother.
Rashee Rice, wide receiver 1 next season.
I like it. I like it,
I'm
man.
sure Nate likes
man,
that
I like
too.
it.
Nate likes that too.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Drew, what do you got?
Anthony Richardson comes back healthy and finishes as a top 3 quarterback in fantasy points per game next season.
Ooh, okay. All right. Anthony Richardson, I like it. Nate, you got one for us?
I do. I will say that Chase Brown will be an RB2 next year with RB1 upside.
Ooh.
Chase Brown, good old Canadian boy. Love to hear it. Love to hear it. Chase Brown, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. If anyone that's listening,
And an
or
Illini.
watching-
Look at us. He's both Canadian and an Illini at the same time. Oh, looks like we got a new Antonio Gibson next year to battle between.
I love it. For me, it's tight end Kyle Pitts finishes as a top 3 tight end under the new coaching staff there in Atlanta. So that's got to be the boldest take out of the 4, right? Considering the player that he was this past season in Kyle Pitts.
I'm all aboard the Kyle Pitts train all over again. I'm ready to get my heart broken again. There's no doubt about it. I'm back in. They fixed I don't even need to know who the head coach is. It's already an upgrade. Just addition by subtraction. I just need them to address the quarterback room. There's no way a new coach can come in and be like, "Hey, I saw what you guys put on tape last year. I'm cool with that." Like, there's no shot that that's going to happen. Whether it's the draft, free agency, whatever, they are going to upgrade that room. So in Dynasty, buy Kyle Pitts while you can, because the price has already gone up with Arthur out the door. Once they upgrade the quarterback room, which is inevitable, the price is going to go up even more. So go get him right now while you can, because Chris is right, man. Kyle Pitts he's too talented to be held down for too long.
Agreed. All the makings for the productions there held back by poor QB play, like you said. Tight end 1 in air yards, tight end 1 in deep targets, high percentage of slot snaps, high percentage of route participation. So I don't know how you interview a guy like Bill Belichick and not hire him. I know they got to go through the whole process in the NFL. The Atlanta Falcons do with the coach hiring process. They also interviewed Jim Harbaugh, but I mean, how can you interview a coach with the stature of Bill Belichick and not hire him? I know he's older. I know the new era game might be passing him by a bit, but he's still one of the best minds in the game. And you don't let that slip through your hand when you got a roster like the Falcons do that are maybe only 1, 2, 3 pieces away from really being a solid competitive team. I'm hoping that they don't hire Bill Belichick. As a Saints fan, as you can tell, I'm sure Rhett's hoping that they don't hire Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh, because these coaches ultimately are winners at the end of the day. I'm hoping they go out and hire some bum off the streets, what they should do. I mean, bring Arthur Smith back. I was happy with Arthur Smith as the Atlanta Falcons coach, not as a fantasy manager, but as a New Orleans Saints fan. I was happy with that. But that's our show. Nate, we appreciate you coming on, chopping it up with us. You came on here with no notes, and you absolutely crushed it, like we do with all our guests here on Fourth and Frames. The frame is yours. Let the people know what you got going on the off season, inside of fantasy football, outside of fantasy football. Let the people know.
Baseball season.
It is baseball season. It's not baseball season yet, Drew. Some of us still have teams that are in the playoffs,
right?
And
can't relate.
That it continues. You could have, you did for at least
used to for a small moment there.
You had it until about a week ago. I mean, you just happened to run into. It was a great game, by the way. It was a great game, but
I'm glad you think so.
It was. I mean, real football game. Yeah, but what do I have going on? I still will have I will still be crashing fantasy football talk like I did tonight and jumping in. It's Shoot the Gap. We're still going to have, I think we're going to have a couple more episodes before the season's over. We would like to give out our IDP awards as well, and maybe look ahead to next year, kind of mimic your little, your show today by far. I doubt we'll do as good a job as you guys do, but Well, we try. I doubt that, possibly, but yeah, like Drew said, it is baseball season for the most part. So I do have, I do fantasy baseball, and so that will take a little bit of my time. But I'm more focused this off season with sticking with football. I'm more dedicated to it because number one, I don't know. I can, like when you have to pick your favorite kid, you know which one you really like the most, but you just can't say it. And so it's like that. And you guys are my favorite children. So I want to stay as close. You're welcome. That's past your bedtime, Drew. You're getting close.
It is. Well, you're welcome on here anytime. No invitation required, as you can tell. Anytime you want to pop in, if you want to let us know, don't let us know. By all means, Nate, you're more than welcome.
Just don't pop into the background because we're putting you on the screen.
Oh yeah. I knew what I was doing. I just want to see you Rhett one more time. I miss talking with you guys.
We appreciate you coming on and chopping it up with us. We appreciate everyone else that joined in, dropped a comment, that liked the stream, that subscribed to the channel the whole season. But the grind don't stop. We here at Fourth and Frames, Rhett, Drew, and myself, even Nate sometimes, are going to be grinding throughout the whole off season into the fantasy on season. Drew, Rhett, any last words for the people?
On to Cincinnati, baby.
On to Cincinnati, and it's been a great season. Wrapping it up. We're officially putting the ball in this season with these awards. You guys are awesome. Just love working with you guys every week. Chris, you're such a pro hosting this. Drew, you brought the research every week. Both of you causing me to elevate my game, get better as a whole. So, it's all love here. It's a big love fest. Fourth and Frames is a brotherhood. Nate, thank you for your mentorship as well. We'll be back. We're trying to get better. Y'all stay locked in with us. We got good stuff coming this offseason.
Yeah. And we got to do another 2024 rookie mock because we're getting roasted with these guys that didn't declare for the draft.
Imagine being the dummy that drafted Trayvon Henderson, man. It couldn't be me.
Way to go, Drew.
Emeka went back to school, idiot.
We appreciate each and every one of you. Make sure you follow Drew at Drew3MR. Make sure you follow Rhett at R Manual Sports. Make sure you follow Nate at Nate Markham. I'm Chris Battistel. That's it for tonight. Toodles.